in regards to this webinar. We'll send it out to you later on via email. And I also want to remind you, as you have questions throughout today's presentation, please feel free to type them into the chat. We have some special guests that AK will also be introducing. And so if you have special guests for her as well, please don't hesitate. So before we get started, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the Harlem School of the Arts. We are here to empower youth to reach their full potential in the arts, education, and life through interdisciplinary arts training that celebrates the rich complexity of their community. We're situated right in Central Harlem in Hamilton Heights, right on the corner of 140th and St. Nick, and we're open to the community to come engage with every single art form: visual arts, dance, graphic design, digital music production, actual music classes where you learn how to play an instrument, voice, as well as theater and musical theater. All of that is under one roof, 37,000 square feet, that was designed and created by our founder, Dorothy Maynor. God rest her soul. This woman, an amazing visionary, founded the Harlem School of the Arts in 1964, right down the street in the St. James Church, where her husband was a pastor. She started the school in the basement, serving probably only a couple dozen kids. She raised $2 million to build this 37,000 square foot facility, in which she then opened it all to young people from Harlem and Upper Manhattan, actually the whole New York City, to come engage with the arts. Dorothy Maynor is a visionary. She was an opera singer and a true Afrofuturist. I always joke with the rest of the team and say, this is Wakanda. Come on and engage with us and learn how to do your thing using the arts to find your creative voice. So without further ado, I want to turn things over to our master of ceremonies for the day, AK Lovelace, who's also an amazing comic book artist too. AK, welcome and take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is AK Lovelace. On behalf of Harlem School of the Arts, welcome. Today we're going to be discussing Jackie Ormes. Jackie Ormes is a very special individual, especially for me and other visual artists of color. Jackie Ormes is the first Black woman who was a professional comic book artist. Our other chair, Yolanda Wins, who was the chair of our music department, in her retrospective on Dorothy Maynor, brought up perseverance as one of the key factors in Dorothy Maynor's journey to creating Harlem School of the Arts. And Jackie Ormes falls right in line with that tradition of perseverance. Jackie Ormes was born in 1911 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She had one sibling named Dolores. Her father was an owner of a printing press and a movie theater. Her mother was a homekeeper at the time. They lived in a basically suburban setting. Interesting little thing about that I found is that we have a tendency to think of Black people in the American story with certain ideas of where we are and certain ideas where we aren't. And Jackie Ormes is a great example of how we are everywhere. There are all types of things that we were doing despite the odds. And in this case, her father owned two businesses. So she was not typically coming from what you would usually think of when people characterize the Black story in America sometimes. Unfortunately, at age 6, her father died in a car crash. And then Jackie's life and her sister's obviously changed quite dramatically. She had to go live with an aunt and uncle while her mother picked up work. And that would be a very defining moment for her, obviously. Eventually, after her mom was able to get herself together to take care of her and her sister again, they moved from Pittsburgh to a small city called, actually, don't even know how to pronounce it, but the natives call it Mon City. It's a suburb not far from Pittsburgh. The next thing that was a pivotal moment in Jackie's life is that while she was in high school, Jackie started to explore journalism. She started to work on different projects, whether it was the yearbook or the school newspaper, and she started to find her own voice in terms of what she liked to do and what she wanted to and would aspire to do. So in the process of this, she wrote to the Pittsburgh Courier, which was a local Black paper in Pittsburgh, and built up a correspondence with the paper. And before she was out of high school, they started giving her work. So she started off as a reporter. She was doing editing. She was proofreading. Funny known fact is that one of the first assignments that she was reporting on with any kind of regularity was boxing matches. This would carry over, and she would in fact become an avid fan of boxing. So that's like just a little fun tidbit right there. But the bottom line is that before Jackie was out of high school, she already had her foot in the industry. She was already working for a major paper, and she was already starting to spread her wings, as it were. Once she graduated high school, she went to work at the Pittsburgh Courier full time. She also got married. Again, this is the 30s, so right after high school, people tended to do that. So in 1931, she married Earl Ormes. And the funny thing is that Jackie Ormes' name, her pen name, is not what she was born. Her original name when she was born was Zelda. Her name is actually Zelda Ormes. The reason that we all know her as Jackie Ormes is because once she started to develop her career professionally, she adapted her parents' surname because it had a more masculine effect to it. And that is actually something that is a very common practice with women and people of color throughout time in the creative industry, because it was a way for them to get past the unfortunate firewall of male chauvinism that often existed and still does in mostly male-dominated industries. So some female artists would use their first two initials and then their last name to hide the fact that they were basically women. And in Jackie's case, she decided to adopt Jackie on Jackson so that it came across more powerful, and she would be able to kind of skirt that gap. When she started working for the Courier, she began to develop as a comic book artist in earnest and launched her first title, which was Dixie to Harlem. And Dixie to Harlem essentially follows the character Torchy Brown. Now, this was landmark for a number of reasons. For one, it was a very good comic book and got picked up by other periodicals almost immediately, including the Chicago Defender, which basically made Jackie Ormes the first syndicated Black comic book artist, which is a milestone of monumental proportions. Another main aspect of it is that Jackie was very forward-minded in her idea of Black people, how we were perceived, and how we were represented. So when she started Torchy Brown, Dixie to Harlem, it was important to her to depict a character who was A, Black, B, attractive, and C, independent and capable, because up until that point, our depictions in mass media were always mammies and kind of grotesque characterizations of Black people, which I found was a very interesting thing to kind of rationalize, because you don't really think about the fact that that is something that Black people had to do, as opposed to other races who may have never had to actually do that in terms of having to try to correct a visual stigmatization of them. So Jackie was very, very upfront, and it was in the forefront of her mind that that was something that she felt a personal responsibility to push back on. So Torchy is a young, powerful Black woman, very independent, very outspoken, and fashionable. Dixie to Harlem follows Torchy's journey from literally Dixie to the Cotton Club in Harlem. It is loosely follows the Great Migration, which is, for those who don't know, one of the worst periods in American history, which is basically after the end of Reconstruction, a wave of terror breaks out across the South, and you literally have Black people essentially becoming refugees in their own country. And that resulted in what we now regard as the Great Migration, which was this huge movement of Black people from the South to the North to get away from lynching, false imprisonment, and a host of other unspeakable things. So Jackie's character, Torchy, essentially was somebody that was on that journey, and she deals with many of the things that some of us have encountered in our own personal journeys. The family relative who kind of poo-poos the idea and almost takes an adversarial role in her desire to escape and grow. The entire process of going from north to south, from south to north rather. And even the fact that her great aspiration was to eventually dance in the Cotton Club, which, for those of you who don't know the history, was a segregated club in Harlem with some of the most legendary Black and frankly American musicians of all time performed, but Black people couldn't watch the performances, and that's in Harlem. So there's a lot of nuance and layers to the story and the character. And as I said, it was a major step forward in what was going to be a career defined by major steps forward. So Torchy ran for a year originally. It wasn't renewed. You don't really know why it wasn't renewed. But regardless of the fact that it wasn't renewed at that time, Torchy would be back, and Jackie was definitely just getting started. So in 1942, Jackie and Earl moved to Chicago, where she started working for the Defender in earnest. Again, she wore many hats. She had developed many talents at this point. Again, she started off in the newspaper business in high school. So by this point, she knows what she's doing. She's getting special assignments. She's writing articles. She's writing columns. She's doing some editing. She's really kind of flexing her muscles in a host of areas and really kind of defining herself. She's already at this point, she's a trailblazer. And in 1945, she goes back to one of her original loves, which is comic book art, and introduces 2 new characters and 2 new strips into the comic art lexicon. Those characters are Candy, witty maid, who worked for wealthy white patrons and had a cynical and snarky attitude where she usually made jokes at the expense of her boss. And Patty Jo and Ginger. Patty Jo and Ginger follow the wayward adventures of 2 sisters, Patty Jo, the younger sister, and Ginger, the older sister. Patty Jo was the firebrand of the group, though, and provided the social commentary, if you will. She was a young, upstart, well-aware little Black girl with ideas and understanding far beyond her depicted age in the comic. And it was kind of the playground that Jackie set up for her characters. In any given strip, you could have Patty Jo making any number of references to salient issues of the time, specifically poverty. There's one famous strip, the middle strip that we're looking at right now, is actually on Emmett Till. It says, I don't want to seem touchy on the subject, but that new little white tea kettle just whistled at me. You can imagine, you can imagine the effect that would have on contemporary readers of the time. Even reading it now, it's kind of bracing for me because that is a very courageous thing to say over something so serious and horrible. She had another strip that you see is her commenting on the feminist movement. Patty Jo making a remark along the lines of how, unfortunately, for all of the pros of the feminist movement, one of its unfortunate huge shortcomings was racism. So a lot of the leaders of the feminist movement, unfortunately, still had white supremacist attitudes, even in regards to women. And the end result of that was the exclusion of Black women from a lot of different aspects of the movement at that time. So Jackie Ormes took it upon herself to point a finger at that as well. And that is kind of a hallmark of how she moved through her world as a comic book artist, from the beginning of her career all the way to the end of it. In 1947, Jackie Ormes broke another sound barrier and essentially penned a licensing deal. Patty Jo was a very popular comic book strip. It did very well. It ran for 10 years. So along that time, 2 years into that successful run, she became in contact with the Terry Lee Doll Company and penned a licensing deal to make Patty Jo dolls. They were able to get the dolls out by Christmas of that year. And they were very successful. They were popular with white children. They were popular with Black children. And besides the fact that they were popular dolls in the sense of just pure business, they were also trendsetters because the dolls of that period in time didn't really look like Patty Jo. A lot of the popular dolls during that period in time actually weren't dolls the way that we think of them. They were these dolls that were kind of had two dolls in one, where one side of the doll looked one way and then you flip it over and the other side of the doll looked a different way. Patty Jo's doll was one of the first dolls of that time that was a straight up doll that was realistic. And not only that, she had access to a vast catalog of clothing and fashion and an extensive wardrobe, essentially. And that was a new thing. A decade after this, the new Barbie doll would come out and it would adopt that idea. Barbie, if we think of Barbie now, one of the first things that pops up in your mind when you think of the Barbie doll is all the different stuff that you can get for the Barbie doll. They got that from Patty Jo. So fast forward to 1950, Jackie is now working with the Pittsburgh Courier again, and she is about to release, or re-release in this case, her touch-tone character, Torchy, this time called Torchy in Heartbeats. And Torchy in Heartbeats was a big step forward for a number of reasons. For one, it was no longer a short strip. It was now an 8-page comic, which is a big jump in terms of just output and what you can do as a comic book artist. It's a way different when you try to compress a story into 5 panels as opposed to 5 pages, in this case 8. So she re-released Torchy in Heartbeats. It was an 8-page story in the Courier. It came out regularly. And in this case, Torchy was now a young professional woman in a relationship with a doctor, and her storyline more or less follows her and her doctor boyfriend fighting a chemical company that is poisoning the land. Sound familiar? Of course, because some of these problems don't seem to go away. But again, Torchy is dealing with contemporary issues of the time. She's being outspoken about them. She's being proactive about doing things about them. She's not a side character in her story. She is not this unattractive, bizarre caricature of what Black women looks like. She's attractive, she's fashionable, she's smart, she's proactive, she's an equal partner in her relationship. And the issues that the comic book follows are very germane to things that we're still dealing with now. You know, she could have done a comic book that was just a straight up romance and spent 8 pages of, you know, having Torchy fawn over her love interest. She didn't. She had all this subcontext built in of environmental pollution, of corporate greed, of plutocracy, all these different higher concepts of people trying to create a better world and butting up against powerful interests. So once again, Jackie wasn't just thinking about entertainment. She had a bigger idea for what she wanted to achieve with her work. And, you know, Torchy and the Heartbeats is exhibit A of that. The other thing that Torchy and the Heartbeats did is it came with an insert, a paper doll insert. Now, I don't know how many of you remember these, but paper dolls were a fun way for kids to kind of play with a doll, essentially, but, you know, without having to go through the song and dance and the money, frankly, of trying to buy different outfits. You get your little paper doll, it'd come with a few outfits, and you just bend the tabs to dress the doll. So every Torchy and the Heartbeats came with a paper doll, and this allowed Jackie to flex some of her other muscles. Jackie was an avid fan of fashion. It was something that she really loved. It was something that she really put a lot of work and thought into. And this allowed her the opportunity to show that off. So in the back of every Torchy comic, you had a Torchy doll with several outfits, all of Jackie's creation, that you could play around with. And again, just fighting that stereotype that Black women could be depicted that way. This is just another way of her going against that. And again, very successful. Jackie retired from comic books in 1956, but she didn't stop becoming a visual. She didn't stop being a visual artist. She continued to create art. She continued to do murals, portraits, and other kinds of work. And she also started to branch out beyond the sphere of the comic world and started to get involved in different community programs and trying to bring her skills to children that looked like her, that did not otherwise have access to it. Very much in line with what we do here at HSA now and what Dorothy Maynard wanted to do when she created HSA. So she started to volunteer and start to help kids on the south side of Chicago to get into the arts, to understand the arts, to see that as something that they may have a talent for and a future in. She also was one of the founding board members of the DuSable Museum of African American History, which is the country's first independent museum that was dedicated to the story of African Americans and its preservation and its place in American history. Jackie Ormes would continue to create art until, unfortunately, she could no longer do so due to arthritis, which, as a comic book artist, I can't tell you how scary it is to start to contemplate the actual physicality of what is necessary to do what you do. Although I'd assume for dancers, it's very much the same thing. But yes, Jackie Ormes, unfortunately, her career was cut short because she literally couldn't go anymore. She lived to be 74 years old. She died in 1985, surviving her husband by 10 years. She was inducted in 2014 into the National Association of Black Journalists Hall of Fame, which is awesome. And the comic book artist in me particularly loves this part. In 2018, She was inducted into the Will Eisner Hall of Fame, which is kind of the Mount Everest in the comic book world. Will Eisner is one of the greatest comic book artists of all time. And to receive his award means that you really have made it and really have done something. So even though it was posthumously done, the idea that she is on that Mount Everest of comic book art and comic book innovators and comic book professionals as a Black person and as a Black comic book artist, it really does mean the world to me. So I will continue to be proud of the fact that we are often given this idea that Black people kind of have a niche place in American history, but the simple fact of the matter is that there are very few things that we weren't there for on the ground floor when they first started, because we've been here since we first started. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our retrospective on Jackie Ormes. But we are not done yet. I have one more gift for you guys. Joining us today is a very special guest, if you will, guest artist, in fact. We start. Oh, there we go. Sorry, guys. Give me 1 second. A little bit of technical difficulty. There we go. So this is Marley Alvarez. Well, more so, this is Marley Alvarez's work at the moment. But this, where is it? Is Marley. Marley, say hi, Marley.
Hi.
Marley is a young comic book artist. I can say that because she is past the point of trying to be a comic book artist. Marley, at the young age of 16, is very, very much so confidently and successfully creating comic books. She has been an HSA student since she was in junior high school. And today we are going to show her do what she does so well. So Marley, if you could tell us a little bit about what we're looking at here.
Well, I'm working on a comic page, and well, my comic's overall story is about like a witch. And so this is just her talking with her friend. And like when you make comics, like what we do is that you have to make a layout and then print it out on paper, and you have to pencil over it. So we have like a base sketch. So I'm going to be going over that with like ink, and that's like the more permanent version.
Yeah, so what Marley just described is kind of our work process. When a comic book is produced, it's done in pencil, but for reproductive purposes, it is inked. Now, when comic books first came about, that was strictly a pragmatic process. Reproducing pencil just doesn't, especially at the time, and the technology just did not work. It needed to be inked. So that's where it came from. But as the art form grew, inking took on a whole thing of its own. So while Marley starts to ink her pencils now, she's not tracing. We don't like to call it tracing because it's not tracing. Marley is doing more than that. What are you doing, Marley? What are some of the things you're thinking about when you're inking?
Well, it's not just going over the lines, but it's also making sure that, every single line has like its own thickness and like character. So that way you can make the image really pop, especially when it comes to things like perspective and texture. You have to make sure that every line is like a different heaviness. And also you need to make sure that they're all like bold when they need to be, and other ones are light.
Yes. So basically what Marley is doing is she's taking the pencils that she fleshed out, and she's basically bringing them to that next level. She's adding line weight, she's adding thick lines, she's adding thin lines, she's adding texture. She's deciding which things she wants you to pay really close attention to, and which things are more background, more backdrop, more giving a sense of flavor to the overall scene. Marley, do you like penciling or inking more?
I like inking much better than penciling. I don't really like penciling very much.
Sorry, that just hurt my heart.
It's very light and it kind of smudges and it feels more messy, but inking feels a lot more strong and final.
So here's an interesting thing. A lot of comic book artists start off doing everything, and then they find the thing that they really like to do, and that's what they kind of zone in on. Right now, Marley, are you kind of leaning towards inking?
Yeah, I'd say I'm pretty good at inking. I'd say it's definitely my strength when it comes to comics. But I know I have to work on doing other things like my penciling and my layout skills, so I have to work on everything.
Awesome. Awesome. So when it comes to the labor of it, how long do you think it takes you about to ink a comic book page?
Well, it kind of depends on like different aspects of the comic, like how many like panels there are, and how difficult they are to draw. I don't know. I would say maybe for this one, I'm expecting it might take me a little bit over an hour or two, but that's a very, very optimistic.
That is extraordinarily
very
optimistic, Marley.
optimistic.
That's superhuman optimism,
Yeah,
Marley.
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
If I get distracted or not, and like I'm in one place the whole time, it's very hard to tell how long it would take.
So, okay, I have another question for you. Hopefully it's not as hard as that one. When you are penciling and inking your own work, there is a fine line that you have to strike so that you're not doing double work. You're not drawing the page twice. How have you found that journey as a comic book artist?
Well, sometimes it does feel like you're tracing over things, but at least for me, I kind of like I add different things when I'm inking,
Right,
like new details, especially when it comes to like tone and like highlights.
right.
So I always add new stuff. And I feel like just when you ink, it just looks so different than when you pencil.
Yes,
So it almost feels like a totally new drawing anyway.
right. So that's actually really well said. So in your mind, when you're penciling a page, do you have kind of like a cutoff switch where you're like, okay, no more detail. The rest is gonna be this is gonna be finished in ink. Do you have kind of a switch that goes off when you're penciling? You realize, okay, no more. This is I'm not pushing this anymore in this phase. The rest of it is gonna be when I get into the inks.
Yeah, there are some things that I usually leave like uninked, especially when it's like someone's dark hair or shadows and things like that. So I won't draw them with a pencil. And then also, whenever I get tired with a panel, sometimes I just think, oh, this is done. I can't do this anymore. I'm just gonna finish it when I'm inking it.
So you rely on your inking prowess to cover up your laziness. That's what you're saying.
No, well, maybe. No. You save time. You have to save energy.
Hey, working hard, not smarter is definitely a tool that you have to be able to utilize as a professional artist, or probably any field, frankly.
What about being smarter, not harder?
Yeah, work smarter, not harder. What do you mean?
You said work harder, not
I
smarter.
did?
Yes.
I said, oh yeah, no, forget what I said. Work smarter, not harder. Not work harder, not smarter. That doesn't work at all. Yeah. So yeah, listen to the kid. Don't listen to me. So right now you're doing hair. I hate doing hair. I don't know what it is, but I've always just hated hair. I hate it. Our hair is different. Our hair is actually kind of easy, but straight hair is just always a chore for me. Is there something that you particularly hate having to do?
I don't like drawing animals. I really dislike drawing animals. I'm not good at it, and I like animals a lot, but I don't like drawing them. Like, especially how they all have like different animal families and different animal bodies and stuff. Like with every human, like humans have different bodies, but it's one human. Like a cat has a different body than a dog, and a dog has a different body than a horse, and that has a different body than a mouse. And the bigger the animal gets, the more complicated it is. I don't like drawing.
So No animal adventures for you then.
No, but I do like animals a lot, and I want my characters to have pets and stuff, so it's very sad when I have to draw an animal and it looks weird.
I, by the way, think Marley is not giving herself enough credit. I think Marley does animals pretty good. Not as good as she does people, I can see that, but it's not bad. So, I'm sorry. Sometimes when people when people ink, it's always fun to see the decision making. When you sit down to lay out a comic book page, what is like your the first thing that kind of like strikes you to try to nail down?
Well, I usually have my script, so the first thing that I try to think about is like what is gonna happen on my page. Like
Right.
what part of my story is this page gonna show? And
Right.
then once I have decided that, next it's like how do I show it in like the best way? Like what's the scene I want to be the biggest? What's the scene I don't care about that's gonna be the smallest?
Right.
And then I have to like decide what's important to show and what's not, and then I have to decide how I want to arrange everything so it like looks nice and it's also readable and not boring at the same time.
Sweet. What are the two rules?
Make it clear, make it cool.
That's right. Make it clear, make it cool. Well, ladies and gents, we are just about reaching the end before we let you go. One more question from Marley. Marley, did you know about Jackie Ormes before this?
I did actually. My friend brought a book a long time ago about like female comic book characters, and I ordered it from the library like a while after, and I thought it was really cool, and I read it a lot. And Torchy Brown was actually in the book as
That's so awesome.
as like a character that they were talking about because it was not so much authors but more like characters. So
Just
there was like Wonder
characters.
Woman and
So
Captain Marvel, and then there was like Torchy Brown. And I was like, oh my god, that's so cool. And I
that's
liked how
amazing.
stylish she was and stuff.
That's amazing. So Torchy Brown, in your own lived experience, transcended her creator and was included in this special category of important characters in comic book history, just as a character.
Yeah, I knew about Jackie Ormes sort of because I recognized her picture because she looks a lot like Torchy Brown.
Right.
And so I kind of made the connection. But like Torchy Brown was like what stood out to me a bit more than the creator. And that's also really cool because since the book was about women comic book artists, I think Jackie Ormes would have been happy, especially with how she pointed out how feminism didn't usually include like women of color. Like to have her character like transcend that and be in that book, I think she might have been glad.
That's awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Say bye, Marley.
Bye.
On behalf of Harlem School of the Arts, I would like to thank you for joining us. I would like to thank Marley for being so bold and brave as to participate in this. And I'd like to thank our president, Mr. James Horton, for being so gracious as to MC and shepherd us through this experiment today. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. I do have one question for Marley before we part today. Marley, what is the inspiration behind your own personal comics?
My comics are usually inspired by stories that I have in my head. Like maybe I'll read a book that I like and I'll want to make a comic. Not so much based on the book, but like from ideas I took away from the book. Like I like to read books and watch movies, and I like to read comics, and I guess everything around me kind of inspires me in the stories that I do. Yeah, that's what I would say.
That's awesome. And the piece that you're working on right now, what is the story of that particular piece?
It's about a witch who hasn't done her summer homework. Well, this page specifically.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, it's about her talking to her friend and realizing that the whole story is about a witch who hasn't done her summer homework, and realizing that like she has spent her entire summer not doing her homework and fooling around, and she should probably do it. Yes.
Very cool. How long have you been a comic book artist?
Well, I've been drawing comic books for a very long time. My mom brought out these old picture books I made with my friend when I was like in second grade. So I think the first, and I've taken comic classes before HSA, but none of them are really as good as the ones here. So I would say the first comic book I really made was here, like the first time I came, when I was maybe in like 6th or 7th grade. So let's see, I was probably like 11 or 12. So maybe it's been around like 5-6 years. So I would say maybe 5-6 years.
Very cool. You are an amazing talent, and keep doing what you're doing. I cannot wait to purchase one of your comics off the shelf or download it online. Again, AK, thank you so much for hosting this session today. I definitely learned a lot about Jackie Ormes. My mouth was on the ground as a Chicagoan. Just absolutely phenomenal woman in her work. And Marley, I cannot wait to see what you do with your talents. Really phenomenal. So thank you all again for joining us. And we'll be back tomorrow with our final installment for celebrating Black history in the arts at Harlem School of the Arts, looking at revolutionary playwrights in Black theater. Thank you again. Bye.